What's your childhood mystery that you finally solved years later? Story one, I remember being about 8 and in the car with my dad. I was in the front seat and we were driving somewhere, and this song came on the radio. He cranked it and said something about it being the best guitar playing ever. He really jammed out, which was really uncharacteristic because he was usually so stoic. It was the only time I heard the song, and he died before I could ever ask him what song it was. When I asked around, no one knew what I was talking about or what song I was thinking of. So I had this melody in my head for years, but how do you look up a song that has no lyrics? So for years and years, this song stayed on the back burner in my brain. I was afraid to forget it. Somehow this story pops up when I am like 26 or so, chatting with my husband, and we searched YouTube for best guitar songs. After about 15 minutes, we find it. Cliffs of Dover was the song that I had burned into my brain on repeat for 16 years. Now I jam out to it with my kids. Story two, I solved a family mystery for my mom. I was not allowed to play console video games during the week all the way until I was 18, but some nights I would really be craving it. So I would noiselessly creep through my house into my basement where I could play video games in peace. But once every 30 times or so, one of my parents would need something from the basement, and I would quickly turn off the television monitor, hide in the guest room, and pray they did not turn on a light or notice the console was on. One night I ducked into the guest room and hid behind the bed. To my horror, my mom followed me into the room and turned on the lights. I was panicking, so when she started digging through the closet with her back to me, I made a run for it. I nearly brushed her shirt, and if she had seen me, I would probably have given her a heart attack. But I made it and kept going all the way to bed. About 5 years went by and my mom said something like, "You are such a quiet walker," and I told her it was because of my basement trips, thinking I had nothing to lose. My mom's face went kind of solemn, and when I explained, she said, "So, there really was someone down there." And she explained that she remembered that exact night and the feeling that there was a ghost in the room. Over the next couple days, she would stare into space and just say, "I cannot believe you were really there." She seemed to get over it, but she probably checks empty rooms closer now. Story three. We grew up poor, and at the age of 10, my friends were all having these crazy birthday parties with petting zoos, bounce houses, clowns, and so on. So my mother, who is very resourceful, decided I would have a sleepover for my 11th birthday. It was great, and we were going to make ice cream cones. So we got all the stuff out with my mom, and my mother opened up the box of cones, and they were all smashed up. She said that we were not having regular ice cream. We were having Magic Castle sundaes because the broken ice cream cones resembled the sections of a castle. We all thought this was great, and we had them. When my friends went home, they asked their parents to make Magic Castle sundaes. 2 days ago, I found out that my mother was getting the past sell-by foods behind the grocery store. They were not expired, just past the sell-by date. She had no idea that the cones were broken up until she opened them with us. She thought of the Magic Castle idea quickly, and we all loved it. Just goes to show how silly kids are. Story 4. As a kid, I played Medal of Honor Allied Assault with my brother. We got to the 5th level, which took place in a rainy French city, similar to Saving Private Ryan. However, we always got stuck on the first objective, which was to locate the bazooka team. There were no clues as to where this team was in a giant rubble-filled city with poor visibility. To make things worse, hidden enemy snipers would constantly fire at you, making the search much more difficult than it already was. My brother and I practically scoured every nook and cranny, but we never found this team. If the bazooka team was trying to stay hidden, they were doing a good job. In the months that followed, we reinstalled and replayed the game several times, but would always get stuck on that level. Fast forward several years, and I got the digital version of Allied Assault for nostalgia's sake. I dreaded playing the 5th level, but to my surprise, I easily cleared the first objective by happening across the corpses of the bazooka team in one of the buildings. Turns out the compact disc we originally played on was bugged where the bodies never even rendered into the game. All we did was waste several hours looking for a group of people that never made it to the battle in the first place. Giddy at the prospect of finally completing the game, I happily continued the level, only to quit when I kept getting targeted by those hidden snipers. Story 5. My father used to take us camping and on hikes and bike rides. He taught us about safety in the woods and on the water, and how to navigate using maps. So it was not all that strange when he said one day, I was maybe 10, we were doing a game where we would be blindfolded and taken on a drive. The object of the game was to call out what direction we were turning by feel, and then ultimately, after driving about 30 minutes, give a guess roughly where we were and which direction home was in. He was impressed how well we did, and we took off the blindfolds and went for a hike. I never thought much about it. Years later, I realized why we played the game. My dad was in criminal psychology, especially offenders. He was kidnap-proofing us, but in a lighthearted way, so there was no fear or trauma. Story 6. When I was 4, I vividly remember getting into my mom's car and her telling me that our cat had died. She told me how she rushed him to the veterinarian and he was shedding fur. Something was seriously wrong. Despite her best efforts, he died. I never knew why he died and why it happened so suddenly, but I accepted that it happened. Fast forward about 15 years, I am home from college for Christmas. On Christmas Eve, I am out driving to the store with my dad and uncle. They are talking about the cat my parents got for Christmas one year, the cat mentioned above. My dad says, yeah, that thing was too aggressive. So I took it to a farm and gave it away. Normally, when the family pet dies, the parents lie to the kid and say it went to a farm upstate somewhere to ease the burden. Not my parents. They told me the upsetting truth, even though it was not, true. Story 7. My uncle, single with no kids, lived a few houses away from my grandparents. So my siblings and I would go between the houses and always loved my uncle's house because he had a huge fish tank of tropical fish and let us play video games. He was the most fun uncle. There was always taking us to the movies, amusement parks, fishing, golfing, and was so fun to be around, always had us rolling with laughter. But over time, he became less okay with us popping over, and we resorted to sneaking into his house. We did not get far along, and he was upset. From that point on, we always just saw him in my grandparents' house. We used to joke with him about having a girlfriend over. Fast forward 17 years later, he had a massive heart attack, and while he was in the hospital, his sisters went into his house to look for paperwork and get the house ready for his return. There they found rooms full of empty bottles of cheap vodka. My uncle had severe addiction for years, and none of us knew it. And suddenly, so many little things started making sense. He ended up dying shortly thereafter of organ failure brought on by addiction, was not even 60 yet. Story 8, I had meningitis when I was 2 years old, and my baby brother had it also, and he died. I had the viral form, he had the bacterial form. I grew up thinking I had it first, and always felt like I gave it to him, and was the reason he died. I know, but you cannot help what you think, especially when you are a kid. It was not until I was an adult that I learned that he actually had it before me. I do not know why no one had ever told me that before, except maybe they did not, because they were not aware that I always harbored this guilt about it since I kept everything inside. Not one person had ever mentioned to me that he had died before I got it, or maybe I was in the hospital when he died. That part still is not clear to me. I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks, so it could have been before or during my hospital stay. Story 9, I was not a kid anymore, but some years back when my mom was terminally ill, my family was receiving food-based gifts from a lot of our friends. Prepped dinners, baked snacks, a restaurant gift card or two, the usual support friends extend when people they care about are going through tough times. For a long time, I remember Dad asking me if I had tried any pastries we had gotten from some family friends, we will call them the Nelsons. I let him know they were a little dry, but very tasty, and he chuckled. It stuck with me because it was an odd question and reaction. It was not until a couple years later, spacing out, driving home, that I remembered Dad's bizarre reaction and the fact that the Nelsons had suggested easing some of Mom's pain with marijuana, which they grew at home around the same period. I had eaten cookies with substances in them. I feel like an idiot for not realizing it, and I do not remember anything that happened after I ate the pastries. Story 10. When we were kids, we would ride our bike up the road to this horse ranch that sat up on a hill. So many memories on that hill. Anyways, in the distance was a huge hill that was eventually bought and turned into a winery. This hill was covered in trees minus the bare area that faced toward us. Well, on one autumn afternoon, my best buddy and I spotted something very furry walk on 2 feet from one tree to another. This hill is likely hundreds of yards away from us, and whatever we saw was clearly bigger than us. Since the sun was setting, it obviously scared us, and we screamed down the road on our dirt bikes away from whatever that thing was. Turns out, many years later, that I discovered what my buddy and I saw was likely a bear walking on 2 feet. For nearly a decade, my buddy and I would have sworn we saw a Bigfoot. Story 11. For over 20 years, I had a very distinct memory of seeing this movie with my dad around the holidays in our living room. It was a black and white movie, but I had a vivid memory of only this one specific scene. I was probably about 6 or 7 when I watched it with him. It bugged me for the longest time. I would think about it periodically for years because I remembered it being so cool. I just wanted to know what movie it was so I could check it out as an adult. Then one day, I cannot even remember where, but someone online somewhere had described this movie and mentioned the name, and it sounded really similar to the one I remembered. I looked it up on YouTube, and it turns out the movie was Babes in Toyland March of the Wooden Soldiers. The scene I remembered so vividly was all of the soldiers marching out of the toy shop. Figuring this out was literally one of the most satisfying things I have ever felt in my life. Story 12. I was brought up in Ireland, and unusual as it was, my parents never drank. Every Christmas, our family friends would forget about this and give our parents alcohol as gifts. Naturally, my parents either threw the bottles of whiskey and vodka into the storeroom or re-gifted them. One year when I was 8 years old, my parents got this awesome bottle of 40-year-old Scottish whiskey. It was a cool-looking bottle, so they placed it with pride on the mantelpiece. I grew older, taller, and was a bit of a jack-the-lad. When I was 16, my parents decided to go out of town for the weekend. My brother, who was 18, decided we should pull an Ocean's 11 on it and steal the bottle and go to a massive house party with lots of beauty-looking ladies. I told him that we would surely get caught because this bottle of whiskey was the pride of the house. My brother, who is so cunning that if you placed a tail on him, you could call him a weasel, explained that we would drink the bottle of the finest whiskey this side of Bonnie, Scotland, and take the empty bottle home and fill it with cold Irish black tea. We duly did this and had an amazing time at the party. Mom and Dad came home and were none the wiser. Day turned into night, days turned into months, seasons passed, years went by, and both my brother and I were in college. We returned home one Christmas and noticed straight away that the bottle of whiskey was gone. We were like, Jesus Christ, Mom is going to be upset. However, nothing was said, and we all had a great Christmas. Again, the days and nights went by, season came and went, and a few years added up. I was around 24 years old and was working in a hospital for a while and often had lunch with the janitors, cleaners, and handymen that worked there. After 3 months, one older Irish gentleman that I got to know very well said to me, "Older man, young man, do you like whiskey?" Me, of course I do. Older man, well, let me tell you a story. Older man, many years ago, your father asked me to paint the outside walls of your home. When your father went to pay me for my hard day of work, I refused. And knowing that they do not drink, I remarked, could I lift that 50-year-old bottle of fine Scottish whiskey? Your father thought this was an amazing deal, and I went home happy. My wife made me a steak and poured me a large glass of whiskey, and I sat on the porch on a lovely summer's day. Then I drank the cool tea and nearly took a heart attack. At this moment, I was literally in the end scene of The Usual Suspects. I could not believe it and did not know what to say. Simply, I was gobsmacked. I offered to pay the older man for his work, however he refused and laughed, saying that he was young once. I am now 45 years old, and my parents to this day do not know that we stole the bottle of whiskey, swapped it out with tea, and then a poor old man drank it years later and never got paid for his honest day's work. Story 13. I had nightmares for years. Literally every dream I had was where my older sister was a robot and trying to harm me. She would come in the form of a tank, things that looked like transformers. Metallic spider had a lot of knives and things on her. Every single metallic robot you can imagine with my sister's face on it. Had only these dreams for all of elementary school. It was solved when I brought it up at 17. I was born super early, 4 months. I was born with so many issues and complications. After I was born, I spent 5 months in the neonatal intensive care unit, where I received a lot of attention from doctors, had multiple surgeries, and had a feeding tube put in me. My mom was sad that I could not meet my sister and she could not meet me. She was 4 at the time. So she put a picture of my sister's face above me in my incubator thing, so I could see my sister. Cute idea, but this ended up causing my brain to put together the only two things I knew: surgical tools and scary hospital equipment with my sister's face. It took us so long to figure out what these nightmares meant. Story 14. When I was a child, I believed in Santa Claus. As I grew up through elementary school, I became more skeptical of his existence. But there was one fact I could not get over, one fact that kept me believing longer than any kid should. How does every single adult have their story straight? Every grown-up could name the reindeer, tell you where Santa lived, how he got around, what he wore, how his toys were made, what you get for being naughty, and so on. How could it possibly be a lie when everyone knows all these exact details? It would have to be a cover-up at a massive scale, possibly organized through secret meetings held by the government that only adults could attend. I toiled for years wondering exactly how they could coordinate such an elaborate lie. I finally broke when one year I asked Santa for coal and instead got charcoal, suspiciously the same kind my parents kept in the garage. I interrogated my parents, and they finally had to admit that it was all a lie, that every fact they knew about Santa came from stories, songs, movies, and television, that there was no corporate conspiracy, only a bunch of adults that had heard far too many shopping mall winter playlists. Story 15. When I was in elementary school, we were learning about different cultures and the folklore associated with them. I have a decent amount of Irish in my blood, so naturally I perked up when they started talking about Ireland, and more specifically, leprechauns. Our teacher told us this tale about leprechauns and how much they love flower petals, and if they were ever caught, they would give you a gift in exchange for their freedom. So naturally, I started hatching a plan. Once I got home, I told my mom all about what I had learned and how I was going to catch a leprechaun and get a gift. I picked some flower petals from my mom's garden, grabbed a plastic cup, a length of string, and a stick, and set up in the backyard. I had my trap in place, laid down on the grass, and watched intently for a leprechaun to wander by, drawn to the smell of the freshly picked petals. About an hour passed and I started to doze off. I do not know how long I had been asleep for, but when I awoke, the cup was tipped over and my trap had been sprung. I could not believe how lucky I was. I was so excited and put my ear up to the cup to hear if anything was squirming around inside. It was silent. As I lifted up the cup, my heart sank because, of course, there was no leprechaun underneath, but hidden in the grass under the cup was a small green boot. I was so excited because I thought, well, I did not catch a full leprechaun, but of course he will want his boot back. So I ran inside and told my mom the whole story. She convinced me to write the little guy a note and to give him his boot back, and perhaps he would give me a gift in return. So I pulled out some loose leaf and a pen and wrote the shoeless leprechaun a note. I told him that in exchange for his boot, I would want a gift in return. I placed the boot on top of the note and left it on the kitchen table. I also made sure to leave the back door open a smidge before bed. In the morning, I rushed downstairs to see if my plan had worked. On the kitchen table, the boot was nowhere to be seen, but in its place was this Power Rangers action figure that I had bugged my parent for a week or so prior. I was so excited and happy and brought it in for show and tell and bragged to everyone at school how I had cut a deal with a leprechaun in exchange for my new favorite toy. But life went on and years passed, and my belief in magic faded along with the memory. Years later, when I was in college, we moved out of my childhood home, and during the move, we all took the time to go through a bunch of our old things. I was helping my mom with one of her memory keep sake boxes, and she was telling me about the different items and what memories were attached to them. At the bottom of the box was a little green piece of felt that was cut and sewn into the shape of a boot. The memory of that day came rushing back to me as I finally realized the effort my mom had gone through to make a little boy believe in magic. It is my favorite childhood memory now, and one of the most impactful moments in my life. I still get teary-eyed thinking about it and hope to do little things like that for my kids, because little things like that really do make a difference. Story 16. When I was around 10 or so, my family moved to a house out in the country. It sat back about a half-mile from the road, and in the front by the road was an old graveyard. Old at least in Midwestern United States standards. Most gravestones were from the 1800s to early 1900s. The year that we moved there, my parents wanted to start several gardens, and one of them up near the fence line by the graveyard to block the view from the road. I was helping my dad plant things, and I found a row of horse teeth, which I thought was weird. But my dad told me that sometimes people buried their horses like we do the dogs and cats we had that passed, and I thought nothing of it, and we buried it back where we found it. Dad never ended up doing much with that garden, but I never worried about it. When I was in college and had long since forgotten about it, one of my friends who was my father's teacher's assistant at the time he taught in the college I went to asked me about the time I dug up part of a skull. Oh yeah, the horse teeth. Oh no, that was not from a horse. Story 17, I had a golden retriever growing up who loved chew toys. One year we got him one of those big meaty cow bones as a birthday present and put him in the backyard to go ham on it. He had it for a single afternoon, and then it vanished. This thing was over a foot long. We checked all over the backyard. I had a fairly large backyard with ivy cattails and some other shrubbery around the perimeter, and could not find a trace of it, not even some overturned dirt where he might have buried it. We eventually concluded that a coyote must have come into the yard at night and taken it, even though our fence was quite tall. 10 years later, the dog has passed away. The whole family has moved halfway across the state, and my parents are renting out the house. They drove down one weekend to do some maintenance for the tenants and found the bones sitting smack in the middle of the backyard steps, meatless and somewhat bleached out, but completely intact. My dad casually brings it up, and the tenants tell him their little dog found it under the back porch. All those years, we thought the dog just liked chilling under the porch, and he was actually working on that bone. Story 18. Well, it was a short-lived mystery for me, but it kind of counts. I was born in Alabama and moved north to Indiana when I was 4. We had 2 dogs that moved with us, and my dog was Hannah the collie. She did not handle the move very well, and I remember her always running away and chewing on doors to get outside, stuff like that. Well, one day my mother told me that Hannah had gone to live on a farm in Alabama and that she would be much happier there. I automatically believed her because we lived in the boonies down in Alabama and all our neighbors had farmland. It was not until I was much older, like 20 plus years, that a friend pointed out to me that what my mom told me sounds like the classic lie you tell a kid when their pet dies. Well, I asked my mom about it again, and she reassured me that Hannah had in fact gone to live with an old neighbor of ours in Alabama that had enough land for her to run like she loved and even proved it with pictures. It was nice to know she had not actually died way back then, but for a few days I felt like an idiot for never questioning that Hannah went to live on a farm. Turns out I was smart to believe my mama. Story 19, some backstory. I am from Northern Ireland, and my parents split up when I was 1 year old in a very angry and messy way. So when I was 3 years old, my mum decided to take us to Glasgow in Scotland for Christmas. We have family there, and Mum thought it would be a nice change and would give us a nice, wholesome Christmas experience. One day we went shopping with my aunt in a large shopping center in Glasgow, and I distinctly remember something strange happening. I saw a man with the exact same bright-colored coat that my dad had at the time. He had similar colored hair, too. I remember trying to run out of my mother's arms, and I was screaming, "Dad, Dad!" But obviously the guy did not look at me. There was a woman with him, too. My mom kept saying to me, "That is not him. He just has a similar coat." Years later, I said to my mom, "Remember that time I thought I saw Dad in Glasgow?" And she instantly said, "Oh my goodness. That was the worst day ever. It was him of all the places in the world. And we happened to be in the same shop in a different country at the same time." I have a good relationship with my dad now, but hearing the truth about that day messed me up. I used to think of it as a funny story before I knew the truth. Story 20. When I was a little kid in the 80s, I was swept up by the panic about Satanism. I went to a Catholic school in a medium-sized city, and they really took it seriously. Everyone did. I was convinced that the entire world was secretly controlled by a cabal of dangerous people, and I was determined to grow up and do everything I could to stop them. Then sometime in high school, the whole thing just went away. One day, the supposed group was out to harm every little kid they could find, and then the next day they were gone. Eventually, I forgot all about the whole thing. Flash forward to my mid-20s. I was in college and sitting in my apartment getting high, when all of a sudden I remembered the whole panic. I remember thinking, whatever happened with that? Were they all caught? Did I dream that? Luckily, the internet was in its extreme infancy, but since my roommate was a longtime computer geek, we had it in my apartment. So I went online and looked it up. I will admit that I felt mixed emotions when I found out that almost all of it was total nonsense. I was both relieved and angry. Relieved for obvious reasons, but angry because it generated a lot of fear in me when I was little. Little kids should not be hearing stories of rituals and violent sacrifices. For goodness sake, my school had a lecturer who was a priest who was supposed expert on the subject, and he showed us a movie where some people harmed an animal. I was junior high age. We were told it was 100% real, and while now as an adult I am skeptical, it still looked real, especially to a 12-year-old. Anyway, the whole thing was messed up, but I am glad I got closure. And now it is one of those things that people are now comfortable talking about and being an adult. I find the whole thing very fascinating. Everything from how it started to how it ended and everything in between is a pretty wild ride. Story 21. When I was 7, my mom and her friend organized meeting the Nicholas St. Nicholas on December 6th for me and the friend's child. Usually you would meet him in school or somewhere public, but this happened in the friend's living room and was just for us two. He entered and immediately started calling us by our names and talked about our latest accomplishments in school. I was mortified. It felt like the stuff nightmares were made out of. There was a gigantic man with a deep voice addressing me, and he was like a stalker. Stranger danger never felt so real. We never repeated meeting the Nicholas, and for years I felt shivers down my spine when thinking of meeting this creep. I was maybe around 25 when I remembered this tragic day and asked my mom who this nightmare in flesh and blood used to be. She was shocked that I never figured out that it was a good friend of her who would visit our home at least once a week over many, many years. He would often talk to me about my life in school, and he knew me since I was a toddler. That explained why he knew so many little details about me, and it only took me a decade and a half to solve. Story 22. Not so much a mystery, but I remember going to visit my dad one weekend when I was like 5, and my stepmom wore dark sunglasses to pick my brother and I up. When we got home, she removed them, revealing a black eye. Obviously, my brother and I asked her what happened. She tripped and hit her face on the corner of the counter. We, being kids, took her at her word. We never noticed any other bruises ever. One night when I was 17, I came home from a party about 5 minutes after curfew and was met by my dad, who had been drinking whiskey. My stepmom always said whiskey made him mean. He asked me why I was late, and I shot back that I was not even 5 minutes late. He stepped up on me, all 240 pounds, towering over my lanky 6-foot frame by a good 4 inches. His eyes glazed over, and I thought I was going to be beaten right then and there. Then he hesitated, stepped back, and stuck his finger in my face and said, "When I say midnight, it does not mean 12:01, it means 11:59, or else now, get upstairs." Needless to say, I quickly untied my shoes and put them neatly in the mudroom closet. He always yelled at me for being lazy if I did not untie my shoes before I took them off, and skipped every other step running to my bedroom. Once in bed, everything made sense. I lost any respect I had left for him after that night. I have not spoken to him in a year, and before then, it had been 2 years. Story 23. Why my parents were so much older than the average mom and dad for a kid my age, and why I had 2 brothers named Chris. All my childhood friends would ask if my parents were my grandparents, and why my twin brother and my older brother were named Chris. My parents were adamant that they had us later in their life, that we looked so much like our dad when he was younger, and that they named my twin and I after our big brother because he begged them to. I shared his middle name, and my twin shared his first name. When we turned 15, my twin and I were doing homework together, and I ran out of paper. I looked in a closet and found a briefcase, which I figured had extra paper. Come to find out, it had a bunch of adoption papers. My older brother and sister were adopted together, and my twin and I were adopted separately years later. Come to find out, my big brother and sister were told they were adopted and used running away to their biological parents as an ultimatum to try to get their way, and ended up actually doing it at one time, which is why our adoptive parents never told us the truth. They were scared we would do the same, I guess. Long story short, I ended up searching for my real parents eventually and finally located a biological family member's phone number when I was 21. I quickly found out that our biological parents had both overdosed and died by time we would have been 4 years old. Pretty anticlimactic, as I had a list of questions to ask them, but I was relieved to have some closure. I am also blessed to have had such awesome parents who in my eyes always will be my real parents. Story 24. When I was about 3 years old, my parents and I lived in a nice two-story house in the foothills. I was up in the office watching cartoons or something, and the phone rang. Apparently, I was a little kid that loved talking on the phone. I would even babble nonsense into an old phone and copy my dad. I picked it up, and a man on the other end knew my name and asked if I liked candy canes. He said his name was Alan, and he was at my door with candy canes for me. So, of course, I toddled downstairs and tried to open the door. Now, this is how it played out in my little baby brain. There was a knock at the door, but before I could get there, my dad opened the door and my mom stood behind him. He had a sword, which was probably just the knife he had carried for years, and scared Alan away. They told me he wanted to abduct me and did not actually have any candy canes. For 10 years, I thought that I had barely escaped being abducted, and it was just something that never got talked about. Turns out it was a lesson my parents wanted to teach me about not opening the door for strangers. My dad made the call with a phony voice, knocked on the door, and ran back inside through the garage before I could get there. About a year or two later, he said that when he took me to meet a friend of his named Alan, I did not like him at all, and he could never figure out why until I brought it up. Story 25. When I was in grade 4, 9 years old, we had a high school student come into our class and talk with us about a writing contest he had won, and as a prize, he had his book published. It was a novel about wolves in the afterlife. At the end of his presentation, he did a question and answer session, and I asked him what made him want to start writing. He said, "I do not know. I just woke up one morning and went, I want to write." I thought he was stuck up because of that answer, but I was interested in his book, so I read it from our local library. Fast forward to last summer, I was 18. I am working in a kitchen and chatting with a coworker who I had known over a year and was pretty close with. The conversation turns towards writing, and he mentions he had a book published when he was in high school. I asked him what it was about. He tells me the spirits of wolves. At that moment it clicked, and I realized he was a student who had come into my grade 4 class so many years before. I told him about the question I had asked him and how his response made me think he was stuck up. He did not remember it, but we both thought it was pretty funny. Story 26. When I was 3.5, we flew back to the United Kingdom from a year in Canada. On the trip home, I lost Rupert, my beloved teddy bear. I was upset for quite a while. Then one day I received a postcard from Rupert. He was in South Africa seeing zebras. Then he went to France and I got a postcard from there. And not long after that, he sent me a postcard from Australia. Rupert was traveling the world and telling me about his adventures. My dad had a conference in Sweden about 9 months after we had returned from Canada. When we went to pick him up from the airport, he was there as expected. But when he was in Sweden, he had found Rupert in the airport lounge ready to come home, and he had his cousin James, who looked just like him, in tow. So Rupert returned to me along with James, and I got my teddy back after he had had a globe-trotting adventure. Fast forward 25 years, and one night at a drawn-out Sunday dinner, as the conversation ebbed and flowed, childhood came up, and I asked my mom and dad what had happened with Rupert's adventure. They looked at each other, and Dad said, "I guess we can tell him now." Mom told the story of how I had lost Rupert on the flight she had called the airline, the airport, the hotel we had stayed in before we left Canada, all to no result. She then went back to the chain store that Rupert had been bought from my, at that point, deceased Uncle Barry had bought him when I was born in '86. But Rupert was no longer available. Someone gave my mom the name of the manufacturer or distributor, I am not sure which, whom she contacted, and was told that they actually had 2 kicking around. She went and bought them both because taking one and leaving his friend all alone is not an option, and brought them home. However, they were brand new and did not have the wear of 3.5 years of toddler love on them. So my mom took one and washed it a bunch, then dragged him through the garden, rubbed dirt on him, washed him again, and generally tried to age him. While she was doing this, my mom and dad had any friends that were going away on holiday send me a postcard from Rupert showing where he was traveling the world. After aging Rupert, my parents decided they needed to have a plausible way for him to return. So when we went to collect Dad from the airport, Mom hugged him first and snuck Rupert and his cousin James under my dad's coat. Dad then proceeded to pull them out from his coat and tell me how he had met up with them in the airport in Sweden. To this day, I remember being amazed that Rupert was sending me postcards. I never questioned that he could write, and him coming back after a 9-month absence was just magical. I never knew what really happened until I was about 30. Mystery solved. Story 27. I have a vivid memory of sitting on my mom's lap. I can see her presence in the periphery in the memory. I am looking across our small living room of the house I grew up in at my grandparents sitting in our chairs with a suitcase sitting between them. I have always loved the memory. I brought it up to my mom when I was around 10, and she said the only time my grandparents had come to visit was when I was less than a year old. I was amazed. My earliest memory was from when I was less than a year. I shared that fun fact about myself with many people over the years. Okay, not that many, but it was something I thought was kind of interesting about me. I am a pretty regular person. Well, fast forward more years and I am about 18. My mom finds a picture of my grandparents visiting when I was a baby. She showed it to me and I was staring at my memory. My grandparents sitting across from the camera, sitting in our chairs with a suitcase between them. My mom was always taking pictures, hated it, then love it now, and she was likely behind the camera, sitting on the couch across from them. I had a memory of a picture, and since my memory was from the viewpoint of the camera, it was as if I was sitting on the couch. I likely also had a memory of being told I was a baby when that photo was taken, so my mind might have filled in that information. And my memory of my mom and my peripheral vision was already really hazy, so my mind may have filled that in, as I would have been a baby. And me sitting on my mom's lap makes sense. Or maybe I really have a memory from when under a year. Story 28. I used to have horrible reoccurring nightmares from about age 6 to 19. I am a 27-year-old man now, wherein everything around me was moving rapidly and I was standing still. Think of the movie Limitless when the main character traveled places. The movie terrified me because of this. I would wake up in a cold sweat, scared to death. When I was 19, a girl I liked convinced me to smoke marijuana for the first time, and lo and behold, being high caused the same thing that had been happening in my dreams for years, happen in real life. It was an epiphany moment for me. I realized that I had these awful dreams for so long because my mom would smoke marijuana around me when I was growing up, and I would get a wicked contact high and not understand what was happening to me, and it translated to my dream. Boom, mystery solved. Thanks, Mom. Literally from that day on, I never had that dream again, and the Limitless movie does not scare me anymore. My mom does not know she caused me that sort of trauma growing up. I cannot imagine she would take it seriously anyways. I have smoked maybe 30 times after that over the course of the last 8 years. It is not for me. Story 29. When I was 9, I had a sleepover in my brother's room. We heard a noise that sounded like alien laser beam gunfire, late 80s. We ran to my parents' room screaming and were sternly told to go back to bed or no more sleepovers. This happened multiple times until it finally stopped and we both fell asleep. Fast forward almost 10 years, and I was helping my mom clean out her closet. I found this small keychain toy that when I pressed a button, it made a sound exactly like 80s alien laser beams. I stared at my mom in shock as the memories flashed back. And when she got her laughter under control, she finally confessed that her and my dad had put it in the vent to play a joke on us. My brother's room was below theirs. However, they forgot to tell us the truth next day, and then forgot all about it until I found the toy. For 10 years, I believed it was aliens or ghosts, and every time it gets brought up, they laugh hysterically. I only stopped being mad when I became an auntie, and now know firsthand how fun it is to play jokes on kids. Story 30. I grew up my whole life with a black uncle. We are all white for miles in every direction, and he is dark as night. My dad called him brother, and my other uncles did as well. He was around my whole life. I never questioned it. I assumed that he was just a close family friend. At my father's funeral, someone told me about amazing Uncle Gideon. When my father was in his 20s, he had very severe bowel disease and needed several operations, and there were major infections. On one particular day, he needed a blood transfusion, but he had O-negative blood. My father's doctor's office was in a mostly black immigrant community, and he walked into a diner and said, "A man needs O-negative blood today, or he will die." Gideon stepped up, gave blood that day and several more times over the next year, whenever Dad needed it. Sometimes side by side, They became friends, blood brothers, and my entire family was incredibly thankful. This was in the 60s. It still was not common to have close friends of a different race where we were from. Gideon and his wife were at every family event we had, and my father was at his. That act of kindness saved my father's life, but the really extraordinary part was how their friendship set an example for both families. It changed the tune of racial differences for us and those who knew them. Story 31. I lost a month of my childhood, and I could not figure out what happened for years, only that it was the month I was sick. All I knew was that I had a high fever. I specifically remember it in snippets. One moment I was getting picked up from school by my grandma, the next I was getting into her bed, and everything went black from there until the morning I went back to school. I had gone into school late that day. When I got there, I opened the door and everyone was staring at me. I went to go put my stuff away, but my teacher stopped me and hugged me tightly while sobbing in the middle of class. I was confused for many years until recently. I finally asked my grandmother what happened, and it turns out that I had a temperature of 104 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 degrees Celsius. It was not long before I was rushed to the hospital and stayed for about a week or so on the brink of death. They did not think I would survive. The doctors believed I had meningitis, but it was soon discovered I actually had the flu. I am guessing my fever was so high that I was delirious for most of it, or put into a medically induced coma. It took me a while to recover, as I was only 4 years old. Get your flu shots. Kids, the flu is no joke. Story 32. When I was a kid, 5 to 9, I lived down the street from Knott's Berry Farm. I was super lucky one year to receive a season pass from my mom. My grandma would watch me during the day, and many occasions we would go to Knott's. There would be days where I would ask Nana, can we go to Knott's today? And she would reply, okay, just call to see if they are open first. I would run over to the phone and she would read me the number to dial. It was not till years later, I was maybe 17 or 18, that I even realized there was even a mystery to be solved. I had walked into my mom's house and her and my Nana were sitting in the living room, both cracking up, gripping the couch. I asked why they were laughing, and my mom gathered herself enough to reply, remember when Nana would have you call Knott's to see if they were open? Yes. Well, how often were they open when you called? It was at that moment a rushing sense of shame, amazement, and utter realization hit me. The days my Nana was under the weather or just genuinely tired or busy, and I would ask to go to Knott's, she would rush to call my mom at work and let her know I would be calling. I would dial the number Nana gave me, and my mom would answer her work phone. Knott's Berry Farm, we are closed today. My mom likes to bring this up now around my friends and whoever she thinks might be interested. And honestly, it makes me happy that she is so proud of herself for that one. Story 33. As a child, I always wondered why my dad never visited me, returned my calls, wished me a happy birthday, wished me a happy holiday, or attempted to say anything to me was because he wanted nothing to do with me. No matter how hard I tried reaching out to him, I never heard from him. I even called him on Father's Day to wish him a good day, before he ever said happy birthday or I love you. On Christmas, my mom had her friend Greg call me to pretend to be Santa, since she said my GameCube was from him. She did not tell me who it was. All she told me was someone wanted to talk to me. I immediately thought it was my dad, and I thanked him for my GameCube. I told him that I loved him and hoped we could talk soon. Once the call was over, my mom went in my grandmother's room and sobbed. It broke her heart, and I could not imagine how Greg felt. It took me a long time to finally realize that my dad did not want to see me, did not want to call me or anything really. I realized that my dad was married to another woman with another child. He was a year younger than me. He took care of him, but not once reached out to me. It was the most bitter pill I ever had to swallow. I had to accept that my father wanted nothing to do with me and probably thought of me as a mistake. I had to realize this in my teens, and it was one of the worst times of my life. Currently, I am over the situation, and I have learned to let it go. I will always resent and hate him for what he did to me, but I will never let it consume me. I promised myself if I ever had a child, I would be a better parent than he would. I have many more stories about my father if anyone is curious, but for now that was my realization. Story 34. So when I was little, circa 1985-ish, we adopted my aunt's poodle Muffy. Muffy was older. A few years later, Muffy peacefully passed away in her sleep while my sisters and I were taking naps. or so I thought. It was not until I was in my 20s and my sisters and mom were all talking about our past pets around the table. We talked about how Muffy must have known we would be sad if she died while we were awake. Talking about old memories with the dog and how stinky she was, bad teeth and old dog smells. But we still loved her. This is when my mom burst into tears and confessed how she and my dad had helped Muffy die. What? She was real sick and was having issues walking, and she claimed we could not afford to go to the veterinarian for euthanasia. She and my dad laid her in her bed in a box and helped her by way of the exhaust from the car. My mother was mortified that she kept it from us all those years and that they never did it to any other animal, because after that they made an emergency veterinarian fund. This I know because of other pet emergencies through the years, and they used it when we had to put my dog Sparky down. It was horrific learning this, and my sisters were so angry at my mom for a while. Please, this was a one-off thing, and my dad was a gentle-hearted man who only wanted our dog to have a peaceful release and could never have done anything painful, even for a second, to end it. It was the early 80s, so things were not as frowned upon then. They instilled the importance of emergency funds for things like the veterinarian while teaching us about money when we were older. I personally have pet health insurance and always keep at least $1,500 in a specific savings account for my dogs. Story 35. When I was in 5th grade and incredibly cool, I am only half joking. I was definitely cooler then than I am now. I did a lengthy Irish dancing number to the river dance theme in an enormous curly wig and ridiculous performance dress at a school talent show. I was beaming by the end of it because older kids, probably 6th, 7th grade, I did not know in the audience, kept whooping during my set, and I was high from the attention. When I got off stage and walked past, a couple of them said, good job, and gave me high fives. I did not understand why they chose me. I had not seen them be that nice to anyone else, but I chalked it up to everyone feeling the same energy I did when I performed. Even my mom said, see, honey, everyone loved it. Fast forward around 16 years, and I am 27, just sitting there, not reminiscing about childhood at all, minding my business. From the middle of nowhere, I suddenly realized they were making fun of me. As I had gotten older, I had seen other groups of kids act like that to mock whatever situation was at hand, but literally had never connected the fact that that day a group of kids had done it to me. My mom, bless her, either way, either knew how cruel kids could be and lied, hoping I would believe her I did, or had no idea that they were being rude. Boy, was that a weird thing to realize all this time later. Still hurt like it would have if I had figured it out at that age, obviously did not affect me, and I chuckled about it in the end, but the initial sting of humiliation was real. Story 36, Blackbirds. After secondary school, I liked walking home instead of taking a taxi, mostly because it meant I had extra spending money, and I liked walking anyway. There were 1 or 2 blackbirds at the time. I could not tell if they were the same ones that sat upon the power lines along the street, sharply chirping whenever I was approaching. They used to wait until they were out of my line of sight, and then fly uncomfortably close to my ear and chirp sharply, and continued doing so until I was a certain distance away. It used to alarm me. It did not help that I had seen many cartoons and horror movies with crows swarming a person and eating them alive. Now I was born into a religious and superstitious family. My mother used to tell me that animals had a knack for sensing evil spirits and danger. There were 3 routes I could take to return home, all parallel to each other, but somehow these birds were always on the route I take, and every time they attacked me. After a while, I began thinking that I was evil or something, or that I did something wrong and was being punished for it. It used to bother me a great deal, and my nightly prayers at the time were filled with asking what I did wrong while trying my best to be on my best behavior. Years later, around the time I was 18, I learned that blackbirds do this to protect their offspring. I felt silly for not having this occur to me. Story 37. Our family stopped celebrating Christmas when me and my 2 older brothers were teenagers because we do not really believe in God. Everyone was fine with the whole arrangement since me and my brothers are quite lazy when it comes to gifts, and we would end up just exchanging the same amount of money as a present anyways. So one Christmas, when I was 14, and we did not have a tree as usual, but on the first day of Christmas, we found a tree in our garden. The tree was pretty small and quite ugly and beaten up looking. Nobody knew how it got there, and because one side of our garden is directly on the street side, we figured that someone who passed by must have thrown the tree in our garden. Our best guess was that a Christmas tree seller did not want to take the trees that he could not sell back home. We ended up decorating the tree because why not? It actually looked quite nice and we all enjoyed it. But we did not go back to celebrating Christmas after that. Years later, probably about 5 to 6, when we were all home for the holidays, we remembered that weird tree that appeared in our garden. My brothers grinned at each other and then told us the story of how the tree actually got there. They went on a Christmas rave the night before the said Christmas, and on their way home they were pretty drunk. They came by a Christmas tree stand that was closed and abandoned. They grabbed a tree through the fence and threw it over the fence, explains the beaten-up look of the tree, and took it home. They said they did not even know why they stole the tree and why they picked the smallest, ugliest one. When they got home, they did not know what to do with the tree and decided to just throw it in the garden. Story 38. This one I just solved last week after 29 years. My entire life, my parents had this old chest. My parents would tell us it was my dad's grandmother's stuff. She came over to the United States after she escaped East Germany. For years, I have looked at that chest, and over the years, it has gotten pretty bad wear and tear. So as a possible Christmas gift for my dad, my brothers and I put our money together to get the chest fixed. We asked our mom when would be a good time to take it to get it fixed. She asked why, and we are all like, because it is dad's grandmother's, and it is getting pretty bad. That is when she dropped the bombshell. When she passed in 1992, she left some stuff to my parents, but when they showed up to the house, they brought nothing to put the stuff in. So my dad ran across the street to an antique store, bought the cheapest chest they had, and put the stuff in it. The chest was always covered with stuff, so my brothers and I never opened it. So what did my great-grandmother leave my parents that they fit into a chest my dad bought for $25? 2 couch pillows and a warming blanket. Story 39. We always wondered why my dad had these odd tendencies. When I was diagnosed autistic, everything fell into place. Suddenly I could understand his behavior, and it was heartbreaking. He had spent his whole life being bullied by family and shunned, but he was not a bad guy, just different. The same for Ehlers-Danlos. I was diagnosed, and things about my grandma and dad made sense, like the chronic fatigue and our family's history of musculoskeletal instability. Everyone up until me was depressed in some way due to feeling lazy or strange. When I was diagnosed, it was like we had answers and solutions to things we had always felt were just personal flaws. People who are disabled and undiagnosed can feel like they are weak or lazy or inadequate somehow, but not know why or how to fix it. Years of misunderstanding were finally answered, but of course, it all came too late. My dad passed from overdose last year. I am the oldest living person in my immediate family at 33. The best thing I know to do is teach the children that they should seek answers and be kind to themselves. I feel so hurt that I lost years to misunderstanding. I am proud the next generation seems so aware, and they self-advocate so much better than we had. Story 40. Back in the day, I got swept up by the website craze. This is before MySpace became a huge thing. I was part of an admin team for some video game forum hosted on Envision Free, and I slowly started learning how to work with HTML and such. Fast forward a year, and I am working with the lead admin to migrate the board off Envision Free to our own host. Being teenagers, we did not have the money to pay for what was basically a copy of our board, so we designed a Perl Spider script to create new accounts on the new site and recreate every single thread and post from every single user. To do this, we had to figure out password hashing so the script would feed it to isolated instances of Opera to speed up the process. I also learned that by reverse hashing a password, you could dehash it and end up with a plain text password. So I figured I would try it out with my mom's Hotmail account. I succeeded in 10 minutes and found a conversation she was having with one of my uncles. Long story short, she hated being our mother. She hated my dad and hated living away from her family. My uncle was trying to convince her to just bounce, and my mom wanted to make sure she would be set for life before trying it. My uncle's last reply, which is what I found, basically said for my mom to accuse my dad of domestic violence as my dad had a temper. I forwarded it to myself and to my dad, printed the chain, and handed it to my dad after explaining how I came across it. My dad confronted her and never disclosed how he got the email. 12 or so years later, my parents got a divorce. My mom crashed at my place for a while and tried to get me on her side. She planned to sue my dad and try to get an alimony, so she wanted to know if I would testify if need be. I told her I would, and I would be sure to bring up the email I found and how the conversation went and who was involved. I told her I had a copy of it still if she wanted to review it. She called my bluff and demanded to see it, only to realize I was not bluffing. She moved out a week or so after that and has not attempted any kind of legal process. I talked to my dad about it, and I found out that the real reason my parents got married was because Mom was pregnant with me. I guess it now makes sense why their wedding anniversary was in July and my birthday is in January. Story 41. My brother and I each got hamsters when I was around 5 or 6. My hamster was named Muffy, and she was super sweet and cuddly the first couple of days I had her. After the third day, something switched and she got really mean. It was like night and day. Before, she seemed to like being held and cuddled. Now she would bite and snap at anyone who tried to touch her. It really bothered me and was really confusing for me since she changed so quickly. I remember bringing Muffy up years later with my brother, and he got really quiet and ended up telling me what happened. Basically, he brought both of the hamsters to his friend's house a few days after we got them. He decided that leaving my hamster and her ball on a table would be fine as long as he taped the ball on the table. I really do not know why he did this. His friend was actually pretty bad, so I think it was maybe his idea. They went and played for a while, and when they got back, they found that Muffy had rolled off the table and broken her neck. They told my mom, and she went to the pet store to buy me another hamster before I found out. As it turned out, the hamster she got was a lot nastier. I think I might have started crying when my brother told me about it, and I still feel pretty weird about the whole thing. I know I was a kid, which is why my mom did what she did, but I do not feel like she handled the situation correctly. Story 42. When I was 11, my siblings and I used to feed a scrawny stray kitten. My parents would not let us bring it inside, so we made it a warm, dry bed under our porch and brought it milk. We called her Charlotte. She was some kind of Siamese. She did not drink a lot of milk, though, or eat much food at all. In hindsight, I can see she might have been pretty sick, but I did not know at the time. She came and went as she pleased, but one day she never came back. The neighborhood kids were wild with speculation. One girl said she saw a man take her away. The man was a weird, quiet neighbor with a ponytail and motorcycles. He never talked to us kids, but he was not mean. He mostly came out at night, and he was always cutting grass or taking his grandma places. We never did find out if it was him. When I was 24, I joined an art class. He was in it. The class met weekly, and I got to know him and everyone else in it. We all became friends, and he still lived by my parents. He was not as much older as I thought. When I was 29, we started dating. About 6 months in, he showed me an old picture. It was a picture of his parents' cat. He asked me if I recognized the cat, which was fat and healthy and happy. I did not. As if it was some horrific confession, he told me it was a cat I asked him about when I was 11. Apparently, I approached him and asked him if he took our cat. I do not remember, but I remember suspecting him. He said kids freak him out, and he did not know what to say, so he lied and said no, just to be done with the conversation. What really happened is he did take the kitten. On his way to work one day, he saw a dead kitten on the side of the road in the blazing summer sun. He went to work. When he got home, the kitten was still there, so he got a shovel and scooped it up to bury it. He always cleans the street in front of his house. But then he took it out of the shovel with his gardening gloves, and it breathed. He took it in and tried to revive it. He syringe-fed it a little water and called a veterinarian. The kitten survived after her hospital stay. He gave the kitten to his parents when she was healthy again, where it lived until just the previous year. He said he felt so bad for lying to me, and he thought I would break up with him. We are married now.